youtube.com. Um, I have never made a YouTube video with my face in it, and I'm kind of doing this on a whim, so forgive me if this is awkward or weird, but I just found this essay that I wrote on being trans from probably 3 years ago now. And I just felt compelled to share it with the void of the internet. I think, especially given the current political climate and the growing hostility towards trans people, that it's important that anyone who's trans talk about being trans and relate to other trans people and potentially help people understand that we are just human beings and that our experiences matter and are not wrong or um I don't know, I'm just rambling. But anyways, I wrote this essay and I'm going to read it to you now. And I'm going to be reading off of the screen, so that's where my eyes will be directed. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, it's called When My Performance Fails, My Gender, the Binary, and the Crushing Daily Horror of This Society. Keep in mind, I was 19 when I wrote this, and I was in liberal arts college at the time. So, all of all of this is very informed by both of those facts, but I still think that it's important to share, and I think that I made several points that I still agree with and relate to. Okay, here's the essay. A few weeks ago, I found myself sitting in the first job interview I've been to in years. It was also probably my first overtly stressful interaction with complete strangers that I've had in a while, so I was more than a little nervous. There were 3 interviewers, triple the anxiety, with varying degrees of southern accents, which made the ma'am one of them directed at me feel all the more surreal. They seemed to be pretty close friends and kept joking that they were going to scare her away, her being me. Except for the occasional ladies, I don't get misgendered much these days. I attribute this to 2 things. One, most of the people I interact with on a daily basis are queer people, or at least people who know I'm trans. And 2, I rarely put myself in situations in which misgendering could even occur, such as being interviewed by multiple people. For the first 2 years of being out as trans, I was misgendered and dead named every single day of my life. I couldn't imagine a world in which this didn't happen. Now that I've somehow propelled myself into that world, it is absolutely shocking to be misgendered. Which isn't to say it's surprising. It definitely isn't, especially given the ways my gender presentation has changed over the past year. More on that later. But it's still a shock, freezing cold and somewhat electrical. It's an assigning. The term assigned sex at birth is becoming obsolete as more and more people realize that not only is gender a harmful construct, but biological sex is as well. Despite this, I still like to use the word assigned to describe how I feel about being seen as a woman by general society. In an oversharing on my Instagram story moment, I once called it, quote, the horrifying daily reality of my assigned womanhood, unquote, which pretty much sums it up. It is not merely sad to be misgendered by strangers in public. It is horrifying. No matter what, most strangers will always assign a gender to me. It is a violation of my existence to be called she and ma'am with such casual conversational ease. This knocking down of the things I've been gradually deconstructing about myself is a kind of violence. The way I think about my transness is extremely complicated and often contradictory. I could attribute this to a lot of things, from my Catholic upbringing to my obsessive consumption of transmedicalist media from the ages of 14 to 17. My perception of trans people in general was pretty skewed, given that most of my interactions with them occurred in the form of YouTube videos, and that all of them spoke about the quote trans community as if it were a monolith, or conversely referred to it as a disaster or a Twitter mob. I have since discovered that trans people, like all people, are not how they are on YouTube or Twitter. Interacting with queerness solely through a screen for several of my formative years definitely fucked up my perception of transness as a concept and all of the myriad ways it can play out inside a person. Of course, I have the internet to thank for any understanding of my transness at all. It gave me a glossary of definitions to hold up in front of myself and see if they reflected me back. In my very small, heteropatriarchal world, the internet was a big rainbow door that I could walk through when I needed reassurance that I wasn't totally insane. Of course, it wasn't Calvin and Blair who were convincing me of this, but the Miles McKennas and the Ash Hardells, who I somewhat bizarrely watched alongside the transmeds. Calvin and Co. made me believe that there was only one way to really be trans. If you didn't fit that description or adhere to those rules, you were not only not what you claimed to be, but also actively causing harm to real trans people. I mean, Calvin was literally saying that being trans is a biological mental disorder that adheres to excuse me, that adheres to the gender binary. You know, like conservative propaganda. It took me a very long time to undo this lie, and I still have moments of doubt. Am I really trans if I don't feel XYZ? The height of my gender crisis occurred, predictably, over quarantine. Less predictably, I had already been out as non-binary to those it was safe for me to come out to for several months by the time March and subsequently lockdown rolled around. Being stuck in my room alone almost 24/7 was super conducive to having a large-scale OCD-fueled mental breakdown about my dysphoria, which I had never really been forced to consider, at least not in relation to my body, which I spent most of my time floating somewhere outside of in fatigued dissociation. I would spend hours staring at myself in the mirror, trying to figure out which parts of myself were deemed girl by society. I would get urges to put on my binder or men's clothes at random times and observe myself from different angles, trying to find some sort of euphoric spark that would tell me for sure, you are transgender. Upon reflection, this is a result of transmed bullshit. This didn't happen for me. I hated the way all clothes looked on my body, and I continued to impulse shop online from ASOS in the hopes that I would find something that would make it bearable to look at myself. I felt stupid and ugly, and I was constantly trying to conceptualize myself through the lens of how I imagined other people saw me. When I went for walks around my neighborhood, I was perpetually stuck in spirals of how is that person seeing me? Do they think I'm a boy? Do I want them to think I'm a boy? Am I a boy? What is a boy? What if I'm actually a girl? Girl is a made-up concept. Boy is also a made-up concept. I feel like a boy. What is a boy? And on and on and on. Despite my non-binary identity, I was stuck in this binary loop for a long time because of the whole trying to understand myself through how I imagined society saw me thing. I had a brief stint with identifying as a trans man post-lockdown, but I could never quite call myself a man, partially because I found the concept of manhood so insidious, and partially because I am not a man. During my second round of finding my way back outside the binary, I became less fixated on the way my body defined my transness. That is, until now. My relationship with my body has changed more rapidly and dramatically in the past year than it ever has. Going to a liberal arts college where the majority of people are not only queer but trans has given me the opportunity to experiment with my gender in ways I never felt comfortable doing in my suburban Catholic teenage hellscape. My current gender presentation is unrecognizable from what it was 2 years ago. I wear crop tops with no binder, I wear skirts and earrings and eyeliner, I take pictures of myself that I look at later and think, okay, well everything sucks, but at least I'm hot. There are like 2 pictures of me from quarantine. Now I have to delete bunches of them every so often for more phone storage. None of this sounds particularly radical, but you have to understand. I put myself in a prison within a prison. I recognize that I am trans in a world that denies and degrades transness, but I did not give myself permission to define that transness in my own terms. I looked to others, mostly the people on YouTube, to define it for me, and then went crazy over their definitions not aligning with mine. Every day that I manage to define what being trans means to me is a day that I unlock another part of the prison. And believe me, I'm still unlocking it. These are huge changes for me. They've also changed the way people see me. One summer, I was asked if I was my brother's brother. One winter, my mother's son. People used to see me as something other than a woman, even when I wasn't trying. This never happens now, though I still have hope that it will happen again. Which brings me to hormones. Before I started testosterone almost 2 weeks ago, I was doing pretty well with divorcing the way my body is perceived from my gender identity. Since starting T, however, these thoughts have come creeping back. I find myself wondering if people are noticing that my voice is deeper or if my presentation is ever confusing to people. This itch to be seen as a boy by strangers on the street is back. Boy has been used to describe me since my time identifying as a trans man and has carried into my non-binary identity. Boy is the closest I can get to harmless masculinity, if such a thing exists. I often find it somewhat infantilizing, best used when I'm the one using it to describe myself, which feeds into my hopefully false idea that I'm the only one who could ever really understand my gender. But what the fuck is my gender at this point anyway? Everything I've said up until this point implies that I am definitionally non-binary, but I mostly associate that word with different versions of myself who are caught up on microlabels and intricacies that no longer concern me. But gender is an inescapable performance. When you're trans, more often than not, the people you're performing for don't know what they're supposed to be looking at. Despite knowing this, it continues to shock me when my performance fails. I used to take this as a personal failure. What am I doing wrong? Why aren't people seeing me the way I want to be seen? Now the feeling is more external. It blames the perceiver. How could anyone possibly look at me and think to use the words she or ma'am? I have a shaved head and a septum. I'm wearing one hoop in my right ear and my leg hair is on full display. But saying this only implies that someone should be able to perceive my gender just by looking at my physical characteristics, which is not something I ideologically believe in or even something that I want. What I want is for people to see my lack of gender. What I want is for people to be unable to see their ideas of man and woman reflected back in me at all. So my gender isn't a gender, but it is vaguely boyish. It also isn't entirely based on the way other people perceive me, which is again contradictory because gender is a performance, and what is a performance without an audience? At which point I remind myself that I, as a person, am not exempt from that audience. The way I perceive me is arguably more important than anything else. Because of this, I had a massive crisis upon starting T. A large part of it was the existence of the crisis itself. I was terrified of the changes that were happening to me, and I was terrified of being terrified of those changes. Because isn't this what I wanted? Or is this just what society wants from me? I worried that starting T was based more on the way I want other people to see me than the way I want to see me. Because of course it is. Because the two endlessly revolve around each other. What I've realized since is that I'm actually really scared of achieving my supposed goal of not being seen as a man or a woman. I've been hiding behind the reality of being seen as a woman, and while that is unpleasant and untrue, it's a discomfort I know well. I don't know how people will treat me as somebody who will probably be visibly trans in most situations for the rest of my life. It's a different kind of social damning, one that I haven't really had to think about. Of course, worrying about something that hasn't even happened yet and superimposing that onto my future as undeniable fact is my specialty. I'm going to continue being on T, and now, luckily, I'm much more excited about the changes. I've always hated the word second puberty to describe medically transitioning, probably because my first puberty was so heinous, but the phrase is growing on me, and I am growing with it. Okay, and this is the afterword. I had so many moments while writing this of who even gives a shit, and oh my god, I'm literally insane. These thoughts are products of growing up surrounded by people who believed these things, gender, identity, and the intersection of the two, were fixed. That these fixed things decide the trajectory of a fixed life. I am horrified by womanhood and manhood alike, and I am horrified by the people who perform them in inhumane and brainwashed and captive ways. I am endlessly grateful to my queerness for freeing me from that life, and I am endlessly angry that the people living out those lives continue to fuck up mine. I'd like to think my gratitude outweighs my anger. Most of the time, I don't know that it does. Thus concludes, I am angry and I am grateful and I am full of fear and love. That's all. That is all. Okay, so that was my essay. Um, I'm not editing this at all, so it's going raw on the tube. Ew. Okay. If you are trans, I encourage you to leave a comment. Do you relate? Do you not relate? Agree, disagree, etc. If you are looking to leave hate, I encourage you to turn your passion elsewhere, and do something else with that. Okay, thank you for watching. Peace, love, and transgenderism. Bye.